CSS has been reclaiming ground that we've had to use JavaScript for in the past. Well, HTML is actually doing the same, and one great example of that is the Popover API. Here you can use just a simple attribute in HTML, connect a button to something like a div, and make it a little popover. You can even style it. You've got access to pseudo selectors, even pseudo elements to style things like the backdrop, and all of this comes with just HTML and a little bit of CSS, no JavaScript required. In this video, I want to do a quick walkthrough of the basics of using the Popover API. Are you ready? Let's go. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. All right, so we've got nothing going on here except some very basic styling. What I want to do is add a couple of buttons that will open different popovers. So let's start with one that says Open Popover 1 and one that says Open Popover 2. Now we also need popovers, and these can be anywhere in the DOM, but let's go ahead and just do them right after their buttons to kind of keep stuff organized. So let's have a div here that says Cool Popover 1, and down here we'll have a div that says Cool Popover 2. Now, obviously these are not popovers yet, they're just buttons and divs. So how do we make these popovers? Well, you can do this with HTML attributes, and there's three you need to know about. One is the popover attribute. The next is called popover target, and yes, that is all lowercase. And finally, popover target action. So let's talk about those one at a time. The popover actually goes on the popover itself. So that would be this div here, like this, and this div here. Now you'll notice as soon as I do that and the code bin saves, they disappear from the visible DOM, right? Because now they're popovers, now I have to get them open. And I do that with the popover target. Now by default, if you point anything with this popover target and pass it the ID of the popover, so let's say like pop1, and then what we need to do is assign this ID of pop1. As soon as you do that, now I can just toggle this on and off with this right here, right? Now if I click here, nothing's gonna happen yet. I've got to do the exact same thing. So let's come over here. We're gonna do that as well, pop2 and pop2. All right, so now we've got both of these working, popover 1 and popover 2. Now there's a couple of really nice defaults. First of all, when I open it, you may have noticed that it closes any other popovers. So if I come over to popover 1, it actually closes popover 2. Secondly, I get keyboard accessibility by default. If I hit escape, it closes it and returns focus to the button that opened it. Now let's open it again, and here I also get something called light dismiss. So I can click off here and it will close it as well. Now there's ways to style all that, which we'll look at in a second. But finally, I'm going to talk about this last one, this popover target action. You can put this inside of a popover or anywhere you want, but usually it would be inside, to point it and say, hey, I want you to hide if I click on this button. So let's have another button in here. And this one, we're just going to say close, like that. Now I need to give this two things. First of all, I have to give it the popover target action. And here I'm going to use the keyword of hide. Secondly, I need to tell it which popover to hide, because it may not be inside of this popover. So I actually have to give it the direction. So just like I did with the open button, I need to use the popover target and pass this pop1 as well. So in other words, I'm saying, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. This is where you're supposed to do it. So if I come over here and click, now in addition to the escape key and in addition to light dismissing it with clicking outside, I can also come and click here. And again, I've got no JavaScript running. This is all done by the browser. While there is more to these attributes, if you understand the basics of this, you can get up and running right away with Popover. Now, secondly, let's talk a little bit about styling. Obviously, this is very default in its styling. I've changed nothing else, as you can see. So let's go ahead and add some extra things to our popovers. I could just select a popover like with any attribute, like this popover. Now let's go ahead and style this. We could do a bunch of different things, but let's say padding should be like 0.5 rem and 1 rem. You'll notice it picks up that padding. Let's add a border radius as well, just to give it some nice rounded corners. Now, you also get access to a pseudo selector. This is simply called popover open. In other words, whenever this popover is open, I want to do something. So let's say we want to make it like display grid. And here we might do like a gap of 0.2 rem. And then let's add a box shadow. We'll make it go down a little bit. We'll have some nice blur to it. And let's make it mostly transparent. So now whenever it's open, it should pick up all of that. Now, just like with the dialog element, you also get access to a pseudo element. That's called the backdrop. It's everything between your popover and the rest of the document. So in this case, we could say something like background. And then let's use the same kind of idea here where we're going to have a mostly transparent section. All right, so now that brings nice focus to the popover. So that's how to use the popover. Here's how to basically style it. Now I want to mention one other thing before we look at positioning this popover. Number one, notice that I can still actually interact with the rest of the DOM. So I can come over here and click below it and it will do whatever I want to, right? So this doesn't actually make the document inert. If you want that, you need to use the dialog element or set it yourself. Okay, lastly, let's talk a little bit about positioning. Now, of course, you can just position this like you would any other like kind of popover state. Right now, it's got some defaults, one of those being margin auto. That's why it's in the very middle of the page, but you could actually put it inside of like a parent wrapper and then position it using absolute positioning. However, there is a new spec that's at least right now in Chrome and not yet in Firefox or Safari, and I'm not sure the timeline there. So I'll just mention this. You may not have use for it yet until it gets to that stage, but what you can do is actually position it using what's called an anchor. So let's go ahead and use this right here to select the button, and this will be our anchor. Now, all you have to do is give an anchor name to whatever the anchor happens to be. And this needs to be prefixed with double dashes, just like a CSS variable. So I could call it like pop1. All right, so this is the anchor name. Now, when it comes to the specific popover in mind, that's this one right here, I'm just going to use that ID, right? So pop1, and say for this one in particular, I want to position it relative to the anchor. So this right here relative to this button. What I can do is use things like top and bottom and left and right. It's kind of based off the position absolute here. And what I can do is pass it the anchor function, and I pass it first of all the name of the anchor. So this would simply be pop1. Next, I tell it where I want the top of this thing right here to be positioned relative to this anchor. So in other words, I might say, hey, I want the top of this to be positioned at the bottom of pop1. So let's actually look at pop1. And if I come over here, you'll notice it didn't really change. In fact, it just moved down a little bit. Well, the reason is because it has some default styling. These popovers, like I mentioned, have a margin of auto. So here I probably also want to come in here and say margin would be 0. And that way it's positioned where I want it to be. Now, I want the top of the popover, that's right here, to be at the bottom of its anchor. I also probably want it to be left, and I'll say anchor. Here we're going to use pop1. And I'll set this to the right of the anchor. So now you'll see the top of my popover is positioned at the bottom of my anchor, and the left of my popover is positioned at the right of my anchor. So you can obviously play with these and change it around if you want. So I can come over here and say, actually, I want the top to be relative to the top. You can even actually come in here and say, I want it to be 50% from the top. Now we've talked a little bit about browser compatibility for the anchoring, but let's talk about it for Popover itself. You'll notice here that there's a bug right now in iOS and iPadOS. I don't know if this is still the case, but you can see that it's basically at 90% aside from that little bug that basically doesn't dismiss the popover. It doesn't have that light dismiss on iOS and iPadOS. Other than that, all the rest of these are at the same compat, 89.84, 89.84. So it's fairly stable. It's up to you kind of what number you want to hit. If I come over here, however, to the anchor, you'll notice this has way less compatibility, and that's because Safari and Firefox have yet to implement this in any way. So who knows when we're going to be able to use that, but hopefully soon. But I figured I'd at least show it to you. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about anchor positioning, I'll leave a couple of documents here, along with some as well. So here are 2 blog articles I found were helpful. Finally, as one more example of how to use the Popover API, you'll see here I've just got a button. This is somebody else's demo, but I just wanted to show it off briefly. And it points to this nav menu. Popover, ID, all the same kind of stuff. We even have the Popover target action of hide right here. You can see that as soon as I click here, it can just slide out. I can close it right here, or of course hit the escape key, or click over here. Either way that works. So a nice menu again with 0 JavaScript. Now you'll notice they've got some nice animations. This is taking advantage of several other new features in CSS. So I'll just mention that. Number 1 is this allow discrete, which allows you to transition on things like display that you typically could not do. And then also you'll notice that it has a starting style attribute. Again, another new thing in CSS. If you're interested in videos of either of those, let me know below. I'll leave docs for a lot of what we talked about down below. I will also mention that you may want to check out some additional features that we did not talk about, like for instance, manual mode with popovers, where you can style and use JavaScript to do a lot of the stuff that you get kind of out of the box, but there are some use cases for that you might find useful. All right, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy coding.